Hi, I'm Sarah with Abby's Attic here in San Antonio, Texas, and this is a quick tutorial on ironing. When we follow a pattern, we'll often say stitch, turn, and press. Well, what's the difference between pressing and ironing? They're actually two different tools. This is an iron. Most people own an iron. Nearly every sewist uses an iron all the time. A press is a great big thing, and it's flat and it has a big handle kind of like a waffle iron, and they're really awesome for sewing, and they're particularly fantastic if you're doing something like pleats, but they're also really expensive and they take up a lot of room, which is why most people don't have them. But when you get shirts from the dry cleaners and they look really gorgeous, it's because they used a press, not an iron. So how do we press with an iron? It's not that bad. We're just doing it in a smaller scale. When we are pressing our fabric, I have a little piece here. I pulled this on purpose so you can see what I'm doing. I've got a little wrinkle, but when we iron and or press, we don't want to pull the fabric out of square. So I'm going to apply my moisture separately instead of having it in my iron. So I'm going to do so along the grain. In this fabric, the grain is along those stripes. That way I can get my wrinkle out without messing it up. Now I'm going to go across the grain so you can see what happens. You can see it's starting to ripple and kind of get out of whack. That's because I went across the grain instead of with it. And then you can go directly across the grain instead of at a bias, and that's okay. But that way we keep our fabric on the square as we're pressing it for whatever our project is. One of the most common things you'll do when you're sewing is you have a seam and then you open it flat. So here's my seam. I have two random fabrics. I didn't even iron them before I started. I'm going to apply a little water because I want steam. And I'm going to iron my two sides up to the piece I'm going to press so that I'm starting with a good base. I'm going to turn this because I have the iron in my right hand. I'm going to use my left hand to open up that seam. And I'm just kind of finger pressing. That's a name and a term. That's a real term. I'm just basically loosely holding that open, and then I can run the point right down the center of my seam, and that keeps me from skewing the fabric. If I were to do something like this, I can actually affect my whole fabric and make my seam not a beautiful straight, perfectly straight line. So in clothing in particular, we have a lot of seams that are curved. You do a dress with princess seams, you have a curve that goes around the bust and then down into the waist. So how on earth are we going to press this? I'm going to go ahead and press it flat first along my curvy seam. And then I'm going to open it. Oh, I forgot to clip the curves on this one. So I need little tiny lines so that when I open my fabric, it will lay flat instead of wadding up underneath my seam. That's where a thing called a ham comes into play. No, it's not made of meat, it's shaped like a ham. And the first way I'm going to do this, that allows me to open it flat, just like we did with our flat fabric, even though my finished shape isn't flat. I'm going to open that up with my fingers again, just like I did before. And I'm going to move this around until I can get my seam flat on that shape. And you say, well, that's really cool if you have one of those, but I don't have one and I don't have a place for it. You can use a bath towel, 100% cotton bath towel, folded up and rolled, is a pretty decent substitute for a ham. I'm going to roll it around, use a different part of my ham. That's why they have these shapes, so that we can get all these different parts out of them. I am using my fingers to hold that open until I can get in there with the heat. Sometimes you can work it sideways. And when it's clipped, yeah, it's a little bit harder to pull those things open. But you get the idea. And the last thing I'm going to point out is I have an interior curve. I'm just going to hold it flat, but I'm going to let this stand up. Now, I have a really small thing, and I'm really, really close to my fingers. So I'm being really careful because I don't want to burn them. Some people are braver than others. Some people just don't want to even take a chance with burning their fingers. You can pin right into the fabric of your ironing board. I do this quite a bit when I have small things that are need good pressing. Is then I have a metal thing that I can go over with my iron. It's not going to hurt my iron. I just don't want to iron over that plastic because you will melt the plastic. But that allows me to open that up nice and flat without damaging my stuff. Look how crisp that is. It's really pretty. I'm going to do a quick rolled hem. Rolled hems are really, really common. I just used the scrap off that other piece. A lot of times when we do a rolled hem, we use a seam gauge. So, in this particular case, I'm going to turn it 1/2 inch and then 1/2 inch. Again, if you're not comfortable holding that, you can pin it. You can just pin it right to the board so it stays put and you don't burn your fingers. And I'm making sure I don't hit the plastic. And you say, okay, well that's all fine and good if it's a straight side. What about the curvy side? Works the same way. If I want to turn this 1/2 inch, I'm going to pin that. And then I'm going to come around here. I'm going to pull that up. And I'm going to pin it on this side. And so I've got this funny space here. I am going to iron that so that it has a little pleat in it. And then when I go to sew it, I'm going to cut that pleat. I'm not going to clip it until after I've pressed it. Sometimes if you have dresses or appliques, things like that, and I have a straighter section here so I can just fold that with my hand. But after I have this pressed, then I know exactly where I need to clip it because I have a little dink there, a little pleat. And last one, super quick. A lot of times there's handles and straps or belt loops. I just did a pattern that was belt loops recently. And a lot of times they'll tell you to fold under 1/2 inch and fold under 1/2 inch and then turn that all to the middle. Well, that's great if you're really good at measuring, but the easiest way to do it is to fold it in half. And then take that raw edge, and I intentionally used a very easily frayed fabric, and then I'm going to tuck that raw edge all the way into my fold. Gives me a beautiful clean line. And flip it over, do the exact same thing. Make sure I'm tucked all the way in. And now I have this really skinny pressed thing that's really easy to sew, and it's going to be really strong because I've got 4 layers of fabric in there. Thank you for watching. This is Sarah from Abby's Attic, www.abbysatticsewing school.com in San Antonio, Texas. Thank you.